the program.
You could do that.
Mhm.
You could do that, and if that's what suits you, that's what suits you. But I'm afraid
It looks like the past that Meghan has tried to keep hidden is finally coming to light. Meghan Markle.
What happens when the royal family says nothing at all, and that silence speaks louder than any denial? Sarah Ferguson, long underestimated and quietly observant, knows better than anyone that real power in royal circles doesn't shout. It waits. And when a story isn't shut down, isn't corrected, and isn't denied, what truth is that silence really protecting? When people talk about royal scandals, they usually focus on the loud moments, interviews, documentaries, explosive headlines. But if there's one thing you learn by watching the royal world closely, it's that the real power never shows up like that. It moves quietly. And no one understands that better than Sarah Ferguson, better known as Fergie. For decades, she has survived inside a system that destroys people far more polished and far more careful than she ever was. That survival alone tells you something important. Fergie didn't last because she was lucky. She lasted because she learned the rules early, especially the rule about silence.
you have a very different kind of look at life. There are many different roads and many different curves. Some are cliffs and some are straight roads. And it's a question of how.
Fergie entered the royal family as an outsider and paid dearly for it. She was mocked, humiliated, splashed across tabloids, and quietly sidelined. Yet through all of that, she never truly disappeared. Even after divorce, even after public embarrassment, even after being written off, she stayed adjacent to power. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because you learn when to speak, when to smile, and when to say absolutely nothing at all. Inside royal culture, silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy. Fergie learned that lesson the hard way, and once she learned it, she never forgot it.
Financially as well, you're right about that.
I think we've been each other's both. We've supported each other in lots of different angles. We're always there for each other, but there's no question about it. He has been completely extraordinary, especially in the last year.
Her decades-long relationship with Prince Andrew is key to understanding why her silence carries so much weight. Their bond wasn't romantic in the fairy tale sense people like to imagine. It was based on shared history, shared social environments, and a deep mutual understanding of how elite worlds actually function. They moved in the same circles, attended the same gatherings, and understood the same unspoken rules. Fergie knew Andrew's habits, his preferences, and the kinds of environments he felt most comfortable in. She also understood how stories around him were managed, softened, or quietly redirected before they ever reached the public. This is where context matters, especially when people talk about elite European social networks. To outsiders, these worlds look glamorous and random, like rich people bumping into each other by chance. In reality, they are tightly controlled ecosystems. Invitations are curated, guest lists are deliberate, access is earned, not accidental. Luxury hospitality at that level isn't just about five-star hotels and champagne. It's about discretion, expectation, and understanding exactly why you're there. People who move in these circles learn to read a room instantly. They recognize faces, hierarchies, and signals without needing introductions. Private yachting culture sits at the very center of this world. From the outside, a yacht looks like a floating holiday. To insiders, it's something else entirely. Yachts are closed environments with limited exits and clear power dynamics. Everyone on board knows who matters, who doesn't, and why certain people are present. There is no such thing as anonymity on a yacht like that. There's nowhere to disappear without being noticed, and nothing happens without being observed. That's why insiders pay attention to details outsiders overlook, like who sits next to whom, who gets invited below deck, and who suddenly stops appearing on the upper levels. This is the lens through which Fergie views the world, and it's why her reactions, or lack of them, stand out. When Meghan Markle entered the royal orbit, much of the public saw a fairy tale. Fergie saw something else. She saw patterns she had already lived through. She recognized ambition, adaptation, and familiarity with elite spaces. That doesn't mean wrongdoing. It means experience. And experience changes how stories land inside royal circles. One moment that raised eyebrows among insiders was Meghan's early anecdote about meeting Prince Andrew for the first time and not recognizing him. To the public, it sounded playful and self-deprecating. To people like Fergie, it sounded strange. Andrew, for all his flaws, was never a background figure in those environments. His presence filled rooms. Anyone familiar with elite European social circles would recognize him instantly. Fergie didn't laugh. She didn't correct the story. She didn't defend Andrew either. She stayed silent. And in royal language, silence is never neutral. Over the years, whispers circulated quietly in social circles about Meghan's pre-royal life, including her presence in high-end hospitality and luxury networks. These whispers were never printed as fact, never formally confirmed, and never aggressively denied. They lived in that gray space the royal world knows well, where stories aren't proven, but also aren't erased. Among these was a long-rumored yacht story involving Prince Andrew, framed not as a scandalous exposé, but as background context by those who believed Meghan was far more worldly than her public narrative suggested. What's important here is not whether these stories are true in a factual sense. What matters is why they persisted, and why certain people never shut them down. Fergie, who had every reason to protect Andrew if she wanted to, didn't intervene. She didn't challenge the narrative privately. She didn't redirect conversations. She listened. In aristocratic culture, listening is permission. It signals recognition, not endorsement, but certainly not disbelief. When Meghan later became a working royal, those old whispers took on new significance. Proximity changes everything. Stories that once felt irrelevant suddenly felt risky simply because they were closer to the throne. The royal institution is less concerned with morality than with stability. It doesn't panic loudly. It recalibrates quietly. People with bloodline protection are managed differently than those without it. Meghan, no matter her title, was never embedded in the system the way others were. That made her vulnerable in ways she may not have fully understood. Fergie understood it completely. She had lived the moment when protection fades without announcement. One day people return your calls, and the next day they don't. No confrontation, no explanation, just absence. That's how the system withdraws support. Watching Meghan, Fergie likely recognized the same pattern unfolding, and instead of stepping in, she stepped back. What makes this situation so striking is that Fergie didn't expose anything with words. She exposed something by doing nothing, by refusing to correct assumptions, by allowing context to circulate, by letting insiders connect dots they are already half recognized. In a world where silence is currency, her silence spoke volumes. This is why insiders recognize patterns outsiders miss. They understand that power doesn't need to accuse. It only needs to stop protecting. Once protection disappears, narratives shift on their own. Journalists start asking different questions. Language changes subtly. Certainty becomes conditional, and public sympathy begins to drift. Whether or not the yacht story is ever confirmed is almost beside the point. Its role is symbolic. It reframes Meghan not as a naive outsider, blindsided by royal life, but as someone already familiar with elite transactional spaces. That shift alone changes how every other story is interpreted, and Fergie, who learned survival through silence, understood exactly what that reframing would do.
The outcome will be, but definitely not good.
I would never have introduced them. It would never have occurred to me to introduce them. I couldn't imagine them being two chalk and cheeses would never. I mean,
this isn't really a story about yachts, or Andrew, or even Meghan alone. It's a story about how power operates quietly, how insiders communicate without speaking, and how silence, when used strategically, can be more devastating than any public accusation. Fergie survived by mastering that silence. Meghan, many believe, underestimated it. And in the royal world, underestimating silence is often the most costly mistake of all. You know how every royal story seems to come with a neat little fairy tale attached to it? Meghan Markle's story was no different. From the very beginning, the public was encouraged to see her as the ultimate outsider. An American actress, unfamiliar with royal customs, stepping into a centuries-old institution with no roadmap and no protection. It was a powerful narrative, and for a long time, it worked. People wanted to believe she was blindsided by palace life, overwhelmed by protocol, and naive about how elite power structures really operate. But inside royal circles, that story always landed a little differently. Whispers followed Meghan long before wedding bells rang. Not loud accusations, not front-page scandals, just quiet observations passed between people who recognize certain patterns when they see them. These weren't about wrongdoing. They were about familiarity, about comfort in elite environments, about knowing how to move in luxury spaces without instruction. To insiders, Meghan didn't look lost. She looked practiced, and that contrast between the public outsider fairy tale and the private perception of prior elite exposure is where the tension really begins. Sarah Ferguson, or Fergie, saw this contrast immediately. Her perspective matters because she has lived every version of royal rise and royal fall. She knows what ambition looks like inside the system because she once embodied it herself. When Fergie looked at Meghan, she didn't see a sweeping romance or a wide-eyed newcomer. She saw a pattern, a familiar one, a woman who understood proximity to power and how to navigate it. That doesn't mean manipulation. It means awareness, and awareness changes how people inside the palace interpret behavior. This is why Fergie's reaction, or rather her lack of reaction, became so telling over time. When Meghan shared her now infamous anecdote about meeting Prince Andrew for the first time and supposedly mistaking him for someone holding the Queen's handbag, the public laughed. It sounded harmless, even charming, a way to emphasize how unfamiliar she was with royal figures. But in royal circles, that story raised eyebrows. Not because it was offensive, but because it didn't align with how these environments actually work. Prince Andrew, for all his controversies, was never an invisible presence in elite society. He was known, recognized, and immediately identified in the kinds of circles Meghan was rumored to have moved in before her royal life. In those worlds, rank is not subtle. It announces itself through body language, deference, and how others adjust around you. People who are familiar with elite European social scenes don't need name tags. They read the room instinctively. That's why the idea of confusing Andrew for staff didn't quite sit right with those who know how these spaces operate. To someone like Fergie, that story wasn't playful. It felt deliberate, not malicious, just intentional, creating distance where proximity may have existed before the official timeline. And here's the important part. Fergie didn't challenge it. She didn't laugh along. She didn't publicly correct the record. She stayed quiet. In royal language, that kind of silence is never accidental. It's a choice. Inside elite society, Andrew's presence would have been unmistakable. He didn't blend into the background. Conversations shifted when he entered rooms. Seating arrangements changed. Attention followed him naturally. Anyone who had spent time in luxury hospitality networks or invitation-only social environments would recognize those dynamics immediately. This is why insiders quietly questioned the anecdote, not out of hostility toward Meghan, but out of lived experience. It simply didn't match how those spaces function. And this is where Fergie's perspective becomes crucial. She understood Andrew's habits, his environments, and the way stories around him were handled. She also understood how narratives are shaped inside the royal ecosystem. You don't contradict someone directly if doing so would create unnecessary attention. You let the story exist. You let others decide what they believe. Silence, in this context, isn't confusion. It's restraint. For years, Meghan benefited from that silence. The palace didn't challenge her outsider narrative. The media largely reinforced it. And public sympathy grew stronger with every perceived slight. But inside private conversations, the tone was different. People who had lived in those worlds recognized the signs of familiarity, comfort with hierarchy, ease around wealth, an understanding of how access works. These aren't things you pick up overnight. They come from exposure. Fergie saw that exposure and didn't romanticize it. She didn't see a love story colliding with tradition. She saw ambition intersecting with opportunity. Again, not as a criticism, but as a pattern she knew well. She had once been labeled reckless, opportunistic, and unprepared herself. The difference was that Fergie learned when to retreat. Meghan, many insiders felt, leaned harder into visibility. The silence around the handbag anecdote became more meaningful as time went on. Fergie never stepped in to defend Andrew's dignity in that moment, which she easily could have done. Nor did she challenge Meghan's version of events. She allowed the story to stand exactly as it was, and that decision spoke volumes to those who understood the code. When someone who knows the truth doesn't correct a narrative, it signals that the narrative serves a purpose. As Meghan's public image shifted from newcomer to critic of the institution, those old whispers gained new relevance. People began re-evaluating earlier moments with fresh eyes. The anecdote wasn't just a joke anymore. It became part of a broader reassessment of how Meghan positioned herself within the royal story. Was she truly unprepared? Or was she carefully crafting distance from a past that didn't fit the fairy tale? Fergie didn't need to expose anything outright. Her power lay in what she allowed to circulate unchallenged. By staying silent, she let insiders connect dots on their own. And in elite circles, conclusions reached independently are far more powerful than accusations made publicly. That's why this story isn't really about one comment or one moment. It's about the growing gap between the image Meghan presented and the perception held by those who understand elite social systems from the inside. Fergie saw that gap early. She recognized the pattern, and she chose not to interfere. In the royal world, silence is rarely passive. It's directional. It guides perception without forcing it. Fergie mastered that art decades ago. Meghan, many believe, underestimated it. And that underestimation is what turned a lighthearted anecdote into something far more revealing over time. Let's pause for a second and be very clear about what this story is and what it is not. What we're talking about here are long circulating allegations and private accounts that have floated quietly for years in elite social circles. They have never been officially confirmed, never proven in public, and never presented with hard evidence. No documents, no verified photos, no formal statements. And yet, the story keeps resurfacing. That persistence, more than anything else, is what makes people pay attention. Not because it has been proven, but because it refuses to disappear. The allegation most often whispered about places, a private yacht gathering off the coast of Nice in 2002. According to those accounts, it wasn't a party in the loud nightclub sense people imagine. It was described as an invitation-only environment, carefully curated, discreet, and understood by everyone present. These kinds of gatherings operate on unspoken rules. You're not there by accident. You're not invited randomly. Everyone knows why the yacht exists, who matters most on board, and how the hierarchy works once the boat leaves shore. That's why yachts matter in these stories. They aren't just luxury toys. They are controlled spaces. Once you're out at sea, there are no casual observers and no easy exits. Every movement is noticed. Every interaction is seen. seating arrangements, who spends time together, who disappears below deck, who suddenly becomes unavailable for meals. All of it is visible. This is why people who have been on these yachts say the experiences leave lasting impressions. You don't forget what you see because there's nowhere for it to hide. According to the private accounts that have circulated, both Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew were allegedly present at this 2002 gathering. Again, allegedly. No proof has ever been presented publicly. But the reason the story lingers is because of how it's described. Witnesses, according to these whispers, noticed a shift in dynamics once Andrew arrived. Attention realigned, conversations changed, people adjusted. This kind of behavioral shift is familiar to anyone who understands elite social hierarchies. Rank announces itself without words. The story goes on to suggest that Meghan was not anonymous in this environment. She wasn't a background figure. She was noticed. And once noticed, interactions allegedly followed a pattern that other guests could see unfolding. That's what gives the account weight for those who believe it. Not dramatic claims, but mundane observations. Who sat where? Who spent time together? Who stopped appearing on deck? On a yacht, these details stand out because there is nothing else to distract you. Still, it's important to stress that no one has ever come forward publicly with a sworn statement. No legal action has been taken, no confirmation has been issued. The story exists in that uncomfortable gray zone where rumor lives, sustained not by evidence, but by repetition and familiarity. And usually, stories like that eventually fade. This one didn't. It stayed quiet, but it stayed alive. For a long time, it didn't really matter. Meghan went on with her life. Andrew continued with his. Their paths diverged completely. In that context, whispers about a yacht in 2002 had no real relevance. They were just background noise in elite gossip networks. Then everything changed when Meghan returned to royal proximity, not as a guest or an outsider, but as a duchess. Once palace walls were crossed, the risk calculation shifted overnight. Suddenly, past whispers weren't just gossip. They became potential liabilities. The closer someone is to the throne, the more their history matters. This isn't about morality, it's about containment. Royal institutions don't panic over rumors. They assess whether those rumors can destabilize the structure. And proximity to power amplifies scrutiny in ways most people don't anticipate. What had once been dismissed as irrelevant became newly sensitive. Not because the story itself changed, but because Meghan's position did. As a duchess, her past was no longer just hers. It became adjacent to the monarchy, and adjacency is everything in royal risk management. Andrew's past had long been categorized, absorbed, and compartmentalized. Meghan's past, however, was still flexible in the public imagination. That made it more dangerous. This is where Sarah Ferguson's silence becomes so noticeable. Fergie knew how these systems work. She understood Andrew's environment better than almost anyone. She also understood how stories are neutralized inside royal circles. You don't deny everything loudly. You don't confirm anything either. You decide what is worth protecting. And for years, this yacht story wasn't worth addressing because it posed no threat. Once Meghan became a working royal, that changed. The palace didn't need to revive the story. It simply stopped discouraging curiosity. Journalists who once would have been gently redirected no longer were. Conversations that once stayed private started drifting outward, not as accusations, but as context. Not new, people would say, just no longer protected. And that's the key distinction. No proof was presented, no exposé was published, but the story's persistence itself became the point. People began asking why it never fully disappeared, why it resurfaced at moments of tension, why certain insiders didn't rush to dismiss it. In elite systems, unanswered questions carry more weight than answers. Proximity to the throne magnifies everything, Behaviors once seen as ambitious become suspicious. Familiarity once seen as confidence becomes a calculation. The same story is told at two different distances from Powerlands very differently. Meghan's elevation turned background whispers into foreground curiosity. What's uncomfortable about this entire situation is that the story doesn't need to be proven to be effective. It only needs to feel plausible enough to create doubt. And doubt is corrosive. It weakens narratives quietly. It shifts sympathy gradually. It reframes perception without confrontation. That's why institutions often allow doubt to exist, rather than fighting it. Meghan's return to royal life reopened doors. She may not have realized we're still connected to old memories. People like Fergie don't forget patterns. They remember environments, behaviors, and dynamics. When those patterns reappeared in a new context, the past stopped being past. Again, none of this confirms the allegations. It simply explains why they mattered when they did. A rumor can survive for years without consequence, but add proximity to the throne, and suddenly the same rumor becomes radioactive. That's the reality of royal life. In the end, the Yacht story isn't powerful because it's proven. It's powerful because it persists, because it aligns with known systems, and because it resurfaced at the exact moment when Meghan's position made it impossible to ignore. And in a world built on silence, timing is everything.